Dr. Thomas Schreiner at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary posted a video right here titled, "Is Tithing Biblical?" Unfortunately, there are problems with several of his statements. Let's listen.
The tithe is part of the Mosaic Covenant. It's part of the Mosaic law, the covenant made at Sinai with Moses and with Israel. And the New Testament is very clear. We're not under that covenant any longer. Galatians 3, Romans 7, Hebrews 9 and 10. So there's a lot of texts that indicate we're not under the Mosaic law.
Unfortunately, that is not true. The Mosaic law says that it's wrong to curse the deaf, it's wrong to trip the blind, and to take bribes. The Mosaic law also condemns child sacrifice and having sex with animals. Because we no longer live in a theocracy, does that mean that these things are now okay? No, of course not. The Mosaic law also says, love your neighbor as yourself, and that we must love God with all of our heart. Is this now done away with because it was given by Moses? No, of course not. That the 10% tithe did not originate with the Levites is clear from the story of Abraham, and that is why whenever people try to refute anything in favor of tithing, one of the most, if not the most important target to attack is Abraham. Abraham is defined in Scripture as a prophet and as a friend of God, and people who argue against tithing try to attack or dismiss Abraham because Abraham lived before Moses, before Sinai, before the Jews. He lived hundreds of years before the Levitical priesthood, and since we Christians also live outside of that priesthood, then the story of Abraham's tithe becomes very important. Dr. Schreiner knows this, and he makes an effort to dismiss Abraham. Let's listen.
Sometimes people appeal to Abraham and Jacob giving tithes. They gave 10% on occasions in their life. Abraham to Melchizedek. Jacob, when God met him at Bethel, promised to give 10%. But those are one-time temporary events. There's no indication that this is something they regularly did, nor is there any command, universal command given to believers from those passages.
So to be fair, Dr. Schreiner makes two arguments. Number one, that Abraham's tithe was a one-time temporary event, and number two, that there is no universal command given to believers from those passages. The problem is that both of his arguments are based on silence. It's just speculation. Abraham lived for 175 years, and his story is greatly condensed in just 13 to 14 chapters in Genesis. That the author of Genesis only included one story of him tithing is not evidence that he never tithed any other time. For example, Abraham is recorded as calling on the name of the Lord only 3 times. Does that mean he lived for 175 years and called on the name of the Lord only 3 times? Dr. Schreiner's claim that Abraham only tithed just once in 175 years, that is pure speculation. Dr. Schreiner wasn't there. How in the world does he know? He doesn't know. The big problem of making arguments from silence is that the moment you step away from the text and speculate, you are in no position to tell other people that they can't speculate. If Dr. Schreiner wants to argue from silence, then so can other people. Moving on, his second argument is that there is no universal command to tithe given to believers. There are several problems with this. The first being that this also is an argument from silence. Maybe God told Abraham to tithe. Maybe he did not. We simply do not know because the text does not explicitly say. And again, since Dr. Schreiner was not there, how does he know that a command was not given to Abraham that included his descendants? Schreiner is again arguing from silence. Furthermore, Genesis 26:5, God tells Isaac that Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Now, what exactly all of these were, we do not know, but we do know that to claim that Abraham was not commanded to tithe and that such a command did not include his descendants is again an argument from silence, and it also assumes that tithe was not included in any of these commandments, statutes, and laws. So to be fair, maybe it was and maybe it was not. But to claim that it was not, you need a basis for that claim, and he does not provide it. Another problem is that in the New Testament, in 1 Corinthians 9:13-14, the Apostle Paul specifically referred to the support that the Levites received as they ministered in the temple, which would have included the minimum 10% tithe. And then in verse 14, he explicitly says that even so, the Lord has what? Has commanded that those who preach the gospel should live from the gospel. Paul is taking an Old Testament Levitical reference and explicitly says that even so, as those Levites were supported, so also the Lord has commanded this for those who live from the gospel. Dr. Schreiner says there is no command, but Paul says the opposite. This is something that the Lord has commanded or ordained not only for the Levites, but also for the work of preaching the gospel as well. These Greek words right here, translated even so, so also, in the same way, is a huge problem for Dr. Schreiner because this is not referencing Abraham. The New Testament author Paul is using the Levitical priesthood, so either Dr. Schreiner is right, which means that the Apostle Paul made an error, or all of Scripture is in fact given by inspiration of God, and Paul was right and correctly understood that support for Levites was a model that was to be followed in the New Testament as well. So if we have to make a choice between Dr. Schreiner and the Scripture, I don't know about you, but for me that's not a very difficult choice. And if that is not enough, Dr. Schreiner has another problem because elsewhere in the New Testament, the author of Hebrews not only confirms the story of Abraham's tithe, but interestingly makes no distinction between Abraham's tenth and the Levitical tenth. People today who argue against tithing try as much as possible to make it seem as though Abraham's tenth was completely different, yet the author of Hebrews makes no such distinction. And not only is there no distinction, but he goes even further and states that Levi paid tithes through Abraham. Now again, we have a huge problem because if, as Schreiner claims, that tithe is only from the Mosaic law given at Sinai, then why would the Levites pay tithe through Abraham if Abraham lived hundreds of years before the Mosaic law was ever given? This is very important because Dr. Schreiner is attempting to create a distinction between Abraham and Levi, but the author of Hebrews does the exact opposite. If, as Schreiner claims, that tithe is only from the Mosaic law given at Sinai, then the author of Hebrews has made a significant error by claiming that Levi paid tithes outside of that law. Furthermore, there is another problem. Hebrews 7 is focused on arguing that Jesus Christ is now a priest after the order of Melchizedek. If Melchizedek, as priest, received tithes and Christ is a priest after the order of Melchizedek, then why? Why should Christ not receive tithes? If the 10% tithe during the Levites was declared as the Lord's, that it is holy to the Lord, and Levi paid this holy tithe through Abraham, then the tithe is just as holy when given to Melchizedek as it was when given to the Levites. If Melchizedek, as priest of the Most High God, received the tithe, if the Levites received the tithe, and if Christ is now a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek, then he ought also to receive the tithe. Because it is holy, the tithe is the personal property of Christ. How? How can we be followers of Christ and not return his own personal property? This is one of the most common fundamental evidences given in favor of tithing, and yet strangely Dr. Schreiner completely ignores this. So overall, there are definitely a lot of problems here that need to be addressed. There are lots of questions that need to be answered. Additionally, Dr. Schreiner has published books wherein he criticized arguments from silence, yet he himself uses arguments from silence. He publicly criticizes others, but he himself does the exact same thing. For someone in his position, that is very disappointing. Anyways, I have addressed the main points. A lot more could be said. There's plenty more to cover, but that's enough for today. I will address additional points in other videos. If you do have any questions or comments, please put them below. If you like this video and would like to see more like it, please subscribe, and as always, have a nice day. Thank you.